Ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la la. Ya la 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 la. Good morning, Shana Tova, and welcome. We're delighted that you are with us this morning for this choral second day Rosh Hashanah service. I say choral because for the first time in 18 months, joining us in this Beit Tefillah is a choir. So if Adam presses the right button, you'll be able to see the choir now. There you go. Isn't that amazing? We have a choir in the Beit Tefillah, one of those markers of return that is so very special for us. So we are really thrilled that you are with us to sing with us. We invite you to really put your voices and souls into this morning's service as we begin on page 20 of the Machzor.
Al tizkaru rishonot, v'kadmaniot al titbonanu, hineni osei chadasha, Ata titzmach halo teda'uha, af asim bamidbar derech, bishimon naharot. ואני ברוב חסדך אבוא ביתך, אשתחווה אל היכל קודשך ביראתך, אדוני אהבתי מעון ביתך, ומקום משכן כבודך, ואני אשתחווה ואכרעה, אברך לפני אדוני עושי, ואני תפילתי לך אדוני את רצון, אלוהים ברוב חסדך, ענני באמת אישך.
And on page 22, in the middle of the page, repentance and prayer and good deeds can transform the harshness in our destiny. Our living God, source of justice and of mercy, our time on earth is short and its purpose is not always clear. You have given us these days to consider who we are and what we have become. As we turn back to examine the year that has passed, in Teshuvah, may we come to understand how we may change the future. As we recite the prayers of our tradition, in Tefillah, may we find guidance and the courage to judge ourselves. As we look beyond ourselves to the justice needed in our world, in Tzedakah, may we find the gift that only we can bring to life itself. May this wisdom of our tradition guide us to a new beginning in the year that lies ahead. On page 30, we're going to take some time as our Bichot HaShachar to reflect on the questions of our tradition, which, though they are in the daily and the Shabbat liturgy, really belong in this period of our calendar. Ribon haolamim va'adonai ha'adonim, lo al sikkotenu anachnu mapilim t'chanunenu lefanecha, ki al rachamecha harabim, Adonai shema'a, Adonai salacha, Adonai hakshiva va'aseh, ma anu, me chayenu, me chastenu, ma tzikotenu, ma yeshuatenu, ma kochenu, ma gevuratenu, ma nomar lefanecha, Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu. Halo hagiborim ka'ayin lefanecha, v'anshei Hashem kolo hayu, v'chachamim kivli mada, unvonim kivli haskel, ki rov ma'aseinu tohu, v'imei chayenu hevel lefanecha, umota ha'adam min habahema ayin, ki hakol havel, levad hanashama haTorah, shehi atida liten din v'cheshbon, lifnei chisei chvodecha. Aval, anachnu amcha, b'nei vritecha, b'nei Avraham ohavcha, shenishbata lo b'ha hamoria, zera Yitzchak yichido, shne'ekad al gabei hamizbeach, adat Yaakov bincha b'chorecha, shemehavatcha she'ahavta oto, umisimchatcha she'samachta bo, karata et shemo Yisrael v'shurun, baruch ata Adonai, mekadesh et shimcha barabim.
At the top of page 32, we have our blessing for study, and delighted to pass you over to Philip, who's going to read our study passage this morning and lead us in the blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. The study passage on page 109 by Rabbi Louis Jacobs comments on the verse from our Torah reading, where the angel of God tells Hagar not to worry about her son, as God has seen him where he is, in Genesis 21:17. Rabbi Jacobs says that this is an expression of the hope that God will judge in the moment we put our best foot forward. Page 109. The Midrash imagines the angels protesting. How can Ishmael be spared in that his descendants will torment Israel? God replies, at the moment he is worthy to be saved. God hears the voice of the lad where he is. Man is a creature of moods and cannot live ever on the heights. The firm resolves he makes on Rosh Hashanah may weaken when the days of self-examination are gone. But at least the rabbis might have said, let man's purpose be strong on these days, that God might hear his voice where he is.
Thank you, Korach. We, following the study passage, read at the bottom of page 32. V'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu, u'v'fi amcha beit Yisrael, v'nehiyeh anachnu v'tzetzaenu, v'tzetza'ei amcha beit Yisrael, kulanu yodi shemecha, v'lomdei Toratcha lishma, baruch ata Adonai, hamalamed Torah, la'amor Yisrael. V'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Bayom hahu yihiyeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Hoshienu Adonai Eloheinu, lehodot l'shem kodshecha, lishtabeach betilatecha. Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael, min ha'olam v'ad ha'olam, v'amal kol ha'am.
page 35, we move into our Psukei Zimra, our verses of song. Baruch Shema V'Yaholam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Omer V'Oseh, Baruch Ozeh U'Makayim, Baruch Oseh V'Reshit, Baruch Merachem al Haaretz, Baruch Merachem al Habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov L'Reav, Baruch Ma'aver Afela U'Mevi Ora, Baruch HaChalahad V'Kayam LaNetzach, Baruch She'en Lefanav Avla, V'lo Shicha, V'lo Masof Anim, V'lo Mikach Shochad, Tzadiku B'chol Dorachav, V'chasid B'chol Mahasav, Baruch Podehu Matzil, Baruch Shenatan Le'amo Yisrael, Et Yom HaZikaron Hazeh, V'et Yom Tov Mikra Kodesh Hazeh, Baruch Hu U'Baruch Shemo. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, HaMelech HaGadol VaHaKadosh Av HaRachaman, Mehulal B'fi Amo, Meshubach V'fa'al B'lshon Kol Chasidav VaAvadav, Uv'shirei David Avdecha, Nahalelecha Adonai Eloheinu, B'shvachot V'zmirot, Nahodecha Negadelecha, Nafa'erecha V'namlichecha, V'nazkir Shimcha Malkeinu Eloheinu, Yachid Chai HaOlamim, Meshubach V'fa'al Shemo Adai Ad, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulal, B'tishbachot.
On page 38, Psalm 19. Heaven declares the glory of God, and the sky reveals the work of God's hands. Each day pours out speech to the other, and night to night passes on the knowledge. No speech at all, there are no words. Their sound cannot be heard, and yet their scope extends through all the earth, and their message to the end of the world. In it God set a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming from his bridal chamber, like a champion who rejoices in running a race. At one end of heaven is the rising of the sun, and its course to the other end. Nothing can escape from its heat. The teaching of God is perfect, restoring the soul. The evidence of God can be trusted, making wise the simple. The duties of God are right, rejoicing the heart. The command of God is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of God is pure, standing forever. The judgments of God are true, all of them just. They are more to be desired than gold, even the finest gold. They are even sweeter than the honey as it drips from the honeycomb. Through them your servant is warned, in keeping with them much follows. Who can detect their own failings? Cleanse me from hidden faults. Preserve your servant from sins of pride. Do not let them control me. Then I shall be blameless, innocent of grave sin.
And while the rabbis of old would tarry for hours over Psukei Zimra, we are going to begin the transition out towards our tefillah. We're on the top of page 50. Baruch Adonai Leolam.
Amen v'amen.
Baruch Adonai Elohim Elohei Yisrael. Osei niflaot levado. Uvaruch Shem kvodo leolam. V'yamalech vodot kol haaretz. Amen. Amen.
Baladecha ein lanu melech go'ol Mashiach, hodeu matzil v'onei umorachem, b'chol eit tzara v'tzuka, ein lanu melech ozeh v'somech zulatecha, Elohei harishonim v'harachonim, Eloah kol briot, Adon kol toladot, המהולל בכל התשבחות, המנהג עולמו בחסד ובריאותיו ברחמים, ואדוני לא ינום ולא יישן, המעורר ישנים והמקיץ נרדמים, מחיים מתים ורופא חולים, פוקח עיוורים וזוקף כפופים, לך לבדך אנחנו מודים.
On page 54, Ha'el, we name you God through the vastness of your power. Hagadol, we name you great because of the glory of your being. Hagibor, we name you mighty for you are eternal. Vahanorah, we name you awesome by the awe you inspire within us. To rise with us as we turn to page 56. Ishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol VaHakadosh B'Shamayim UVa'aretz, כי לך נאה, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו לעולם ועד. שיר ושבחה, קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודאות, לשמך הגדול והקדוש, ומעולם ועד עולם אתה אל. ברוך אתה אדוני, בורא כל הנשמות, ריבון כל המעשים, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך העולמים.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמך רבה. וחיי כל בית
Please do be seated, and we're at the top of page 60. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzeh or uvarei choshech, osei shalom uvarei et hakol, hakol yoducha v'hakol yishabchucha, v'hakol yomru ein kadosh kadonai, hameir la'olam kulo oleyoshvav, uvtuvo machadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reshit. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita, malah ha'aretz kinyanecha, hamelech hamaromam levado me'az, hamshubach v'hamfo'ar v'hamidnaseh mimot olam. Elohei olam b'rachamecha harabim rachem aleinu, Adonu zeinu tzor miskabenu, magei nishenu, miskav ba'adenu, or chadash al tzion ta'ir, v'nizkeh chulanu meheira lo'oro, Baruch atah Adonai, yotzeh ha'morot. With deep love you have loved us, and with great and overflowing tenderness you have taken pity on us. Source of our life and our sovereign, show us compassion because of your own greatness, and because of our ancestors who trusted in you. For you taught them rules to live by, to do your will with their whole heart. Let our eyes see the light of your teaching and our hearts embrace your commands. Give us integrity to love you and fear you, So shall we never lose our self-respect nor be put to shame. For you are the power which works to save us. You chose us from all peoples and tongues, and in love drew us near to your own greatness, to honor you, to declare your unity, and to love you. Blessed are you, God, who chooses your people Israel in love. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Va'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavach hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha v'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot beineinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha. We leave some time for you to read the second paragraph of the Shema for yourselves on page 68, or to take a look at the alternative passages on pages 66 and 67. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe le'emor, daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta alehem, va'asu lahem tzitzit, al kanfei vigdeihem ledorotam, v'natanu ad tzitzit ha'kanaf betil techelet, v'haya lachem letzitzit uritem oto uzchartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam v'lo taturu acharei levavechem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. אמת ויציב וקיים ומקובל וטוב הדבר הזה עלינו לעולם ועד. Emet Elohei Olam Malkeinu, Tzur Yaakov Magen Yishenu, Ledor Vador Hu Kayam, Umalchuto Ve'emunato La'ad Kayamet. Emet She'ata Hu Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'Elohei Avotenu, Podenu Umatzilenu Me'olam Hu Shemecha, Ein Elohim Zulatecha, Ezrat Avotenu Atahu Me'olam, Magen Umoshia Lehem V'Livnehem Achareihem V'chol Dor Vador, Ashrei Ish Yishma Lemitzvotecha, V'Toratecha U'Devarcha Yasim Al Libo, Emet Atahu Rishon V'Atahu Aharon, Umi Baladecha Ein Lanu Melech Goel Umoshia, Mi Mitzrayim Ga'altanu Adonai Eloheinu, Umi Beit Avadim Peditanu, Moshe, Miriam, Uvenei Yisrael, Lecha Anu Shira B'Simcha Rabba, V'Amru Kulam. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים, לשמך על שפת הים. יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו. צור ישראל, הומה בעזרת ישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. Baruch Ata Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael.
We turn to the Amidah on page 76, and we invite you to rise with us. Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Hilatecha. My God, open my lips, and my mouth shall declare your praise. Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu ve'Elohei Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, Koneh HaKol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot ve'Imahot, Umevi Go'el Livnei v'Neihem, L'ma'an Shemo B'Ahava. Choser Moshe Magen, Baruch Ata Adonai, Magen Avraham, Poked Sarah. Ata Gibor La'olam Adonai, Mechayei Meitim, Ata Rav Lahoshia, Morid Hatal.
Somech
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. וכן תן פחדך אדוני על כל מעשיך, ומתך על כל מה שבראת, ויראוך כל המעשים, וישתחוו לפניך כל הברואים, ויעשו כולם אגודה אחת, לעשות רצונך בלבב שלם, כמו שידענו אדוני אלוהינו, שהשלטון לפניך, עוז בידך וגבורה וימינך, ושמך נורא על כל מה שבראת. וכן תן כבוד אדוני לעמך, תהילה לרעך, ותקווה לדורשך, ופתחון פה למייחלים לך, שמחה לארצך, וששון לעירך, וצמיחת קרן לדוד עבדך, ועריכת נר לבן ישי משיחך, במהרה בימינו. וכן צדיקים יראו וישמחו, וישרים יעלוזו, וחסידים ברינה יגילו, ועולתה תקפוץ פיה, וכל הרישה כולה כעשן תכלה, כי תעבר ממשלת זדון מן הארץ. ותמלוך אתה אדוני לבדך, על כל מעשיך, בהר ציון משכן כבודך, ובירושלים עיר קודשך, ככתוב בדברי קודשך. קדוש אתה ונורא שמך, ואין אלוה מבלעדיך, ככתוב, ויגבה אדוני צבאות במשפט, והאל הקדוש נקדש בצדקה. אתה וחרתנו מכל העמים, אהבת אותנו, ורצית בנו, רוממתנו מכל הלשונות, וקידשתנו במצוותיך, וקרבתנו מלכנו לעבודתך, ושמך הגדול והקדוש עלינו קראת, ותיתן לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, באהבה את יום הזיכרון הזה, יום תורה, מקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, יעלה ויבוא, ויגיע ויראה, וירצה וישמע, ויפקד ויזכר, זיכרוננו ופקדוננו, וזיכרון אבותינו, וזיכרון משיח בן דוד עבדך, וזיכרון ירושלים עיר קודשך, וזיכרון כל עמך בית ישראל לפניך, לפליטה ולטובה, לחן ולחסד ולרחמים, לחיים ולשלום, ביום הזיכרון הזה. זוכרנו אדוני אלוהינו, בו לטובה. ופקדנו בו לברכה. והושיענו בו לחיים טובים. ובדבר ישועה ורחמים וחוס וחוננו, כי אליך עינינו, כי אל מלך חנון ורחום אתה. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, מלוך על כל העולם כולו בכבודך, והנשא על כל הארץ ביקרך, והופע בהדר גאון עוזך, על כל יושבי תבל ארצך, וידע כל פעול כי אתה פעלתו, ויבין כל יצור כי אתה יצרתו. ויאמר כל אשר נשמה באפו, אדוני אלוהי ישראל מלך, ומלכותו בכל משלה. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, סבנו מצווך, ושמחנו בישועתך, וטהר לבנו לעובדך באמת, כי אתה אלוהים אמת, ודברך אמת וקיים לעד. ברוך אתה אדוני,
Melech al kol haaretz, Mekadesh Yisrael, v'yom hazikaron. We're just going to take some time for the intermediate paragraphs of the Amidah for ourselves. We're going to come together for Oseh Shalom on page 89. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Turn together to page 91. We're going to rise together for the words of Avinu Malkeinu. We're about to discover the slight limitation of the camera system because what we are going to have is we are going to stay with the camera on the ark as we sing Avinu Malkeinu, but the voices that you hear, the sound that you hear will be the sound of our choir. Let's rise together.
Amen.
the strangest of our time that we are still in a position where we begin our Torah service and close the ark instead of opening it. But we are still there as a marker, primarily I think of the fact that we are still not all together. We continue to have our Torah service in an abridged form. As I've said a number of times, the rabbi said that you should leave a section of your house unplastered as a marker that things are not as they should be. This Torah service is the section of our house that remains unplastered until we can be together in full. To begin our abridged Torah service, we turn to page 100. Saharon vayome Moshe, Kuma Adonai, v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha. The one, the eternal, a God of mercy and compassion, slow to anger, generous in love and truth, showing love to thousands, forgiving sins, wrong and failure, who pardons.
Amen.
for those who took part, one of the highlights of this very odd year has been the launch of the Eilith Chavruta project. ACP had been a few years in the making, an idea that had bubbled around up here until the pandemic, and most importantly, until the joining of Rabbi Elliott, made it possible for us to introduce regular Chavruta into the life of this community. We started the project just a few months ago, 9 months ago, at the beginning of 2021, with the study over 6 weeks of a tractate of the Mishnah, the compilation of legal texts from the earliest layer of Rabbinic Judaism, dating to the end of the 2nd century CE. The tractate we selected, seeing as we were in the run-up to Purim, was Masechet Megillah, the rules of Purim and of the Megillah reading, and it turns out, of other aspects of our prayer lives, including the other Torah readings in our year. Among the texts we studied was a Mishnah on the Torah readings for festival days. If you go online, you can find some of those texts. There's a special text sheet that's going to accompany my words over the next few minutes. So among the texts we studied was the first text on that sheet from Mishnah Megillah. It includes the following line, which is in bold. Rosh Hashanah, b'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad l'chodesh. On Rosh Hashanah, we read as our Torah reading on the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month. And that's it. Now this, for obvious reasons, should come as something of a surprise because that's not it. In that earliest layer of rabbinic law, the established Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah was not what we do. It was simply the biblical description of Rosh Hashanah, probably the version found in the book of Numbers. The Mishnah makes no mention of the portions that we associate with this festival, no mention of Genesis 21, that David will read for us in a moment, nor Genesis 22. Neither the narratives of Hagar and Ishmael, nor of the Akedah are mentioned in the Mishnah. So where do these come from? We first find them in another compilation known as the Tosefta, a collection of legal traditions contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but not included in it. The Tosefta gives us an insight into another world, into other voices in early rabbinic Judaism, into what else Jews of the period were doing, not the official version as compiled by Yehuda Hanassi, but the other practices that developed among the rabbis as they shaped this new form of religious life. Other traditions from the period are often also quoted in the Talmud, where they're referred to as braitot, external sources. The Talmuds, in a statement of value in our tradition, remember other traditions and bring them into the discussion of the Mishnah. So the second text on your sheet is the version of the Tosefta as a braita in the Babylonian Talmud. It continues in the same way, it begins in the same way as our Mishnah. Rosh Hashanah, b'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad l'chodesh, it tells us. And then it adds the Haftarah, not the Haftarah that we read, but a text from Jeremiah. And then it continues, V'yesh omrim, v'Adonai pakad et tzara, u'maftirin b'chana. And some say, an alternative version of this, an alternative tradition, is that we read, and God remembered Sarah, and then we have the story of Hannah as our Haftarah. While the accepted practice, the law as laid out in the Mishnah, was to read the description of Rosh Hashanah, there were others from very early on in our rabbinic Judaism who had begun to associate this day, or rather yesterday, with the story of God remembering Sarah. Now, for scholars of Rabbinic Judaism and Rabbinic history, this is quite interesting. It's one of those interesting occasions in which it was not the ruling of the Mishnah that would become dominant, but the variant practice. Not what Yehuda Hanasi thought, but what other rabbis were doing. For by the time of the Bavli, as you can see on the sheet, the practice of reading Genesis 21, as we will this morning, had become entrenched in Babylon. Indeed, there, where they were keeping 2 days, they had come to read a pair of narratives together. Genesis 21 and Genesis 22, the next chapter. The Akedah being read, it seems, primarily because it was the continuation of the story. Numbers 29 had not disappeared completely. The Bavli does not mention it, but we know from continuing practice that Numbers 29 is still read, but is relegated to the maftir on Rosh Hashanah in Orthodox and Masorti synagogues. Then the question is why? Why had Genesis 21 come to be associated with Rosh Hashanah? Why this subversion of the Mishnah? Why do we read that and not as the Mishnah intended? Now, in part, it might be because the text from Numbers is just a little bit obvious. It's rather mundane. The Mishnah tells us in one of the least imaginative bits of rabbinic law that on Rosh Hashanah we should read about keeping Rosh Hashanah. But why Genesis 21? Why this story of Hagar and Ishmael? Why the story of the birth of Isaac? A few years ago, in another sermonette on Rosh Hashanah 2, I suggested that the Torah readings of Rosh Hashanah can be understood as polemical. In the early Christian tradition, and remember, Christianity and early Palestinian Rabbinic Judaism grew up intertwined with one another. In early Christianity, the birth of Isaac, the passage that David will read for us in a moment, was linked with the miracle birth of Jesus. Vadonai Pakad et Sarah was read as a foreshadowing of the visiting of Mary. We know that Genesis 21 was one of the scriptural readings in early Christianity for the days associated with the birth of Jesus. So in part, our Torah portion this morning is a reclaiming. Identifying the remembering of Sarah with Rosh Hashanah was a claiming of this narrative for Judaism. Now, this is just conjecture, but there is another brighter in the Bavli, the third on that sheet that you can see, taken from Tractate Rosh Hashanah. And we therefore know that the remembering of Sarah, the passage that David will read for us in a moment, was associated with Rosh Hashanah from very early on in our tradition. There we find a list of events that took place on this day, or rather yesterday, given in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. And there we are told, B'Rosh Hashanah nifkada Sarah Rachel v'Chana. On Rosh Hashanah, Sarah, Rachel, and Hannah were remembered by God. And so we read two of those stories, two of those rememberings, as a reflection of this rabbinic chronology. So that's the history. It's interesting, maybe-ish. But when we read Torah, we don't read Torah merely as an act of history, but in a search for meaning. What meaning can we find in Genesis 21 that we will read in a moment? We would like these texts to have been selected because they speak to this moment in our lives, to what we are supposed to be doing. Yet it feels like they are remnants of another part of Rosh Hashanah, another strand in the development of our tradition. Now, I'd love to say that there were multiple rabbinic texts that explicitly link Genesis 21 with the exercise of reflection and repentance that we undertake at this time of year. But unfortunately, I can't, because there are very few. However, I leave you before our Torah reading this morning with one that does. A tradition over the page from Pesikta Rabbati, a late, probably 9th century collection of homilies for festival days and special Shabbatot. Evidence that the rabbis, at least some of the later rabbis, were asking exactly that question. But what does that give us? But what does that tell us? What do we make of reading Genesis 21? Pesikta Rabbati is an answer. According to this homily, Sarah was remembered for a particular reason, and that reason should teach us about how we should be in the coming days. This midrash suggests that remembering of Sarah was for a particular reason, because Abraham had prayed for Abimelech in the chapter before, in chapter 20. Sarah was remembered according to this midrash because Abraham was willing to put himself out for someone else. Sarah was remembered because in all of his difficult interaction with Abimelech, Abraham still cared about the other, was still merciful towards him, still sought to make peace with him, whatever had happened before. As Rabbi Yosef ben Domaskit says in this passage, take this as a sign in your hand. As long as you are merciful to others, Hamakom will be merciful to you. So this is at least one message that we can take from this odd choice of portion, that our behavior towards others, and in particular, our willingness to make efforts to make peace with one another, is the key factor in our relationship with God. Hence, the first words that David will read for us in a moment, the final words of this midrash, Vadonai pakad et Sarah, and the Eternal remembered Sarah. I'm going to call David and Naomi to Torah so that Naomi can recite the blessings and David will read Torah for us. If you want to follow the passage beginning, Vadonai pakad et Sarah, it's on page 104 of your Machzor. Yamdu David Tuvia ben Ariah Uframet v'Naomi bat Gamliel lakriyat haTorah.
Go for it. I guess.
Have we lost? We've lost them.
No, we're here.
Great. Perfect. Thanks, David.
Okay, we just do it. Okay.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai
Adonai
hamvorach.
hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher b'chabonu mikol ha'omin v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
And herewith, as promised by Josh, page 104. Adonai paked et Sarah ka'asher amar, vayas Adonai leSarah ka'asher diber. Vatahar, vateled Sarah la'Avraham ben lizukunav, lamoed asher diber oto Elohim. Vayikra Avraham et shem beno hanolad lo, asher yaleda lo Sarah, Yitzchak. Vayamal Avraham et Yitzchak beno, ben shmonat yamim, ka'asher tziva oto Elohim. V'Avraham ben ma'at shana behivaled lo et Yitzchak beno. Vatomer Sarah, tzchok asa li Elohim, kol hashomea yitzchak li. Vatomer mi milel la'Avraham, henikia vanim Sarah ki yaladati ven lizukunav. Vayigdal hayeled vayigamal, vayas Avraham mishte gadol, b'yom higamel et Yitzchak. Vatere Sarah et ben Hagar hamitzrit, asher yaleda la'Avraham mitzachek, ותאמר לאברהם, גרש האמה הזאת ואת בנה, כי לא יירש בן האמה הזאת עם בני, עם יצחק. וירא הדבר מאוד בעיני אברהם על אודות בנו. ויאמר אלוהים אל אברהם, אל ירא בעיניך על הנער ועל אמתך, כל אשר תאמר אליך שרה שמע בקולה, כי ויצחק יקרא לך זרע, וגם את בן האמה לגוי אשימנו, כי זרעך הוא. וישכם אברהם בבוקר, ויקח לחם וחמת מים, ויתן אל הגר שם על שכמה, ואת הילד, וישלחיה, ותלך, ותדע במדבר באר שווה. ויכלו המים מן החמת, ותשלך את הילד תחת אחד השיחים. ותלך ותשב לה מנגד הרחק כמתחה וקשת, כי אמרה, אל אראה במות הילד, ותשב מנגד, ותישא את קולה, ותבק. וישמע אלוהים את קול הנער, ויקרא מלאך אלוהים אל הגר מן השמיים, ויאמר לה, מלאך הגר, אל תראי, כי שמע אלוהים אל קול הנער באשר הוא שם. קומי, שאי את הנער, והחזיקי את ידך בו, כי לגוי גדול אשימנו. ויפקח אלוהים את עיניה, ותרא באר מים, ותלך, ותמלא את החמת מים, ותשק את הנער. ויהי אלוהים את הנער, ויגדל, וישב במדבר, ויהי רובה קשת, וישב במדבר פרן, ותיקח לו עמו אישה מארץ מצרים.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת, וחיי עולם נותר בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Amen. Shkoach.
Thank you.
As we turn to our Haftarah, you find the blessings on page 130. Today's Torah, Haftarah leads on from this story of the conception of Isaac and onto the conception of the prophet Samuel. And with the conception of the prophet Samuel by Hannah, we return to an order. So the commentator James Ackerman says that the birth of Samuel returns the world to order, following the time of the judges, a time when the people did what they liked and often weren't very nice to each other. So again, we have this conception of an individual who's going to bring back stability to the Israelites by bringing them a king in the form of Saul and then also of David, who is there on the having had a time when things weren't quite so, people weren't being so nice to each other. So it relates very much then also to Abraham doing this great thing and then being rewarded for it. And it's my pleasure to hand you over to Sharon, who's going to bless and read the Haftarah for us this morning.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'cha b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza v'divreihem v'ne'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai haboher b'Torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo u'v'nvi'eh ha'emet v'tzedek. There was a certain man from Ramatayim Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, the Ephratite. He had 2 wives, one named Hannah and the other named Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah was without children. This man used to go up from his city year after year to worship and sacrifice to the Eternal One of Hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, were the priests of the Eternal. Whenever Elkanah offered his sacrifice, he would give portions to Peninnah and all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he could give only a single portion, for although he loved Hannah, the Eternal had closed her womb. Her rival was constantly provoking her, tormenting her, because the Eternal had closed her womb. And so it went on year after year. Whenever she went up to the house of the Eternal, she would provoke her, so that she wept and would not eat. Elkanah, her husband, would say, "Hannah, why weep? Why not eat? Why so sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" Once Hannah arose after they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh. At that time, Eli the priest was sitting on a seat at the doorpost of the temple of the Eternal. She was bitterly distressed and prayed to the Eternal and wept uncontrollably. She made a vow saying, "Eternal God of hosts, if you will look within and see the distress of your servant, if you will remember me and not forget your servant and give your servant a male child, then I will give him to the Eternal all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head." As she continued praying before the Eternal, Eli watched her mouth. For Hannah had spoken in her heart, only her lips were moving, and no sound could be heard. Eli thought her some drunken woman. So Eli spoke to her, "How long will you go on drinking like this? Rid yourself of your wine." But Hannah replied, "No, my lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I drank no wine or spirits. I have been pouring out my soul before the Eternal. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking all this time because of so much grief and provocation." Then Eli answered, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the petition that you sought." And she said, "May your servant be worthy in your sight." And the woman went her way, her face no longer as before. They arose early the next morning, worshipped before the Eternal, and returned and reached their house in Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife, and the Eternal remembered her. And when the time came around, Hannah conceived and bore a son and called his name Samuel, for she said, "I have asked the Eternal for him." Then the man Elkanah and all his household went up to offer to the Eternal the annual sacrifice and to fulfill his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she told her husband, "When the boy is weaned, then I will take him so that he can appear before the face of the Eternal and there remain forever." So Elkanah, her husband, replied, "Do as you think fit. Remain till you wean him, and may the Eternal fulfill the divine word." So the woman stayed and nursed her son till she weaned him. Then she took him up with her when she had weaned him, together with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of meal, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Eternal at Shiloh, even though the boy was still young. They slaughtered the bull and brought the child to Eli. Then she said, "Please, my lord, as you live, my lord, I am the woman who stood near you here praying to the Eternal. For this boy I prayed, and the Eternal granted my petition for which I had asked. Moreover, I now lend him to the Eternal. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Eternal." And he worshipped the Eternal there. Al HaTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al hanvi'im ve'al yom hazikaron hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu l'chavod u'letiferet. Al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim la ומברכים אותה, יתברך שמה בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד, ודברך אמת וקיים לעד. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ישראל ביום הזיכרון.
Amen.
Shakara.
Shakara.
Thank you.
We turn to our first set of shofar calls for this second day Rosh Hashanah. We're on page 160. We turn to the Tikyot Miushav, the sounding of the shofar whilst we are sat down.
Allah Elohim bitrua, Adonai b'kol shofar, Zamru Elohim zameru, Zamru lamalchenu zameru, Ki melech kol ha'adam ha'aretz Elohim, Zamru maskil, Malach Elohim al goyim, Elohim yashav al kiseh kodsho, Nedivei amim ne'esafu, Am Elohei Avraham, Ki le'Elohim maginei aretz, Ma'od Na'ala. On Yom Hadin, this day for judgment on all we have done, the sound of the shofar breaks into our lives. It shatters our illusions and we awake to truth. Our time on earth is short and we are forced to choose. Life and death have been set before us, good and evil, blessing and curse. Without repentance, sin brings only destruction. The shofar sounds its warning and calls us to account. We say the blessing for blowing the shofar, or hearing the shofar being blown at the top of page 161. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar.
And there is a machloket about whether you also say Shechianu, and the ruling, the main dominant halakha is that as long as someone is wearing a new piece of clothing, we can say Shechianu. So let's assume that someone's got a new pair of socks on this morning. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Tekiah. Shvarim trua. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim truah. Tekiah gedolah. Page 162, we turn to the prayers for the community and go to the home of Martin Bellman, who is going to read those for us.
Our God, whose dominion is everlasting, we ask you to bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, and to guide the government of this country. Help us to be good citizens, working together for justice and peace at home and abroad. Bless this holy community and all holy communities, and support the life and work of all who labor for their welfare. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessing on the state of Israel and all who live there. Give wisdom and understanding to its leaders, and friendship and compassion to the people, so that there may be lasting peace on its borders and in its homes. Soon may your promise be fulfilled. For Torah shall come out of Zion, and the word of God from Jerusalem. We ask you to listen to our prayers and look on us kindly, supporting those who are troubled, consoling the bereaved, and sending relief to those in pain or anxiety. As you blessed our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless our own congregation, all other congregations gathered in prayer, and everyone who responds to the needs of the community. On this New Year's Day, the birthday of the world, remember us for good and judge us with mercy, that this may be a time of healing and renewal for us, for all peoples, and for our damaged earth. May such be the divine will, and let us say, Amen.
And having begun our Torah service, including the words of Numbers 10:35, Vayhi ben Soah, about the ark moving, we conclude with its pair from the next verse about the ark resting. We turn to page 168.
Uvnucho yomar, shuva Adonai revavot, alfei Yisrael, kuma Adonai limnuchatecha, ata va'aron uzecha, kohanecha yilbashu tzedek, v'chasidecha yeranenu, va'avo David avdecha, al tashev penei meshichecha, ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al ta'azov. As we finished our Torah service, we now have two options. You can either stay here with Rabbi Josh and the choir and hear your full set of shofar blows. You can also jump onto Musaf for the mind with me, if you'd like to. We're going to be looking at the power of laughter, having encountered Sarah laughing in our portion, having seen Ishmael laughing and Sarah reacting to that. And we'll be asking the question of God, does God laugh or play? And you will also get the chance to hear one set of shofar blows, and we'll be reciting Kaddish so that you don't feel you need to stay in here if you're reciting Kaddish, if people want to.
So please do feel free to log off and to go and study with Rabbi Elliot. If you are staying in here with me and with the choir, we are turning to page 170. I hope in God, whose presence I seek, awaiting an answer. Here among my congregation, I sing of God's power, and as I sing, I think of all that God has done. Our task is to open our hearts for prayer, but the answer to prayer comes only from God. Please do rise with us. Adonai sfatai tiftach ufi agid hilatecha, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'Elohei emotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Koneh v'Rachamav Shamayim v'Aretz, Magen Avot bidvaro, Mechayei Meitim b'Ma'amaro.
L'chata ale kedusha, ki ata Eloheinu melech.
Emet ki atah hu dayan umochiach v'yodea va'ed v'chotev v'chotem v'sofeh umoneh v'tizkor kol hanishkachot v'tiftach et sefer hazichronot u'me'elav yikareh v'chotam yad kol adam bo u'v'shofar gadol yitaka v'kol demama daka yishama U'melachim yechafezun v'chil urada yechezun v'yomuru hinei yom hadin livkod al tzva marom badin ki lo yizku ve'enecha badin v'chol ba'ei olam ya'avrun lefanecha kivnei maron.
Rosh Hashanah Yikateinu Uvyom Tzom Kippur Yechateinu Kama Ya'aborun V'chama Yibarayim Me'ir sama mi baraj mi va magefa mi vachanika mi vaskina mi anuach mi anuach mi ashkit mi atoraf mi shalev mi tyaser mi amni mi ashir mi yoshkal mi
Ki cheshimcha kentilatecha, kasher lichos v'noach litzot, ki lo tachpot b'mot hamet, ki im b'shuvo midarko v'chaya, v'ad yom moto techakelo, im yashuv miyad tekablo.
Emet ki ata hoyotram ve'yodeya yitram ki hem basar vadam Yesoto me'afar v'sofo le'afar b'masho yavi lachmo mashul kacheres handishbar kachatzir yavesh kazitz navesh ketzel oper uchanan kaleh Ruach Nashabet, Uchavak Boreach, V'chachalom Ya'uf.
Ein kitzba lishnotecha, ve'ein keitz la'orech yamecha, ve'ein shior l'makavot kavodecha, ve'ein perush la'elom shemecha, shimcha na'elecha, v'ata na'el lishmecha, ushmeinu karata vishmecha. כבודו מלא עולם, משרתיו שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו. ממקומו הוא יפעם ברחמים, ויחון עם המייחדים, שמו ערב ובוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים באהבה שמע אומרים. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו שנית לעיני כל חי, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אדיר אדירנו, אדוני אדוננו, מה אדיר שמך בכל הארץ, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. לדוב אדון נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו, מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה. Turn to the three sections, passages, collections of passages and shofar calls for Rosh Hashanah, the Malchuyot, Zichronot and Shofarot. We're on page 183. We invite you, if you have not already done so, to rise with us as we turn to the words of the Aleinu in the middle of the page. שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עזו בגבהי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו. כך כתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת.
Ein Od. Therefore, Almighty God, we put our hope in you. Soon let us witness the glory of your power, when the worship of material things shall pass away from the earth, and prejudice and superstition shall at last be cut off, when the world will be set right by the rule of God, and all humanity shall speak out in your name, and all the wicked of the earth shall turn to you. Then all who inhabit this world shall meet in understanding, and shall know that we are all partners in the repairing of your world. For yours alone is the true kingdom, and only the glory of your rule endures forever. So it is written in your Torah, the eternal shall rule forever and ever. So we take a moment to take our seats and just to spend some time over the sayings on Malchuyot. For each of our sets of sayings, we'll just have some time, some silence for us at home to read, and then out of the silence, maybe I'll just pick one for one of them to read out loud before our shofar calls. On the top of page 186. What is the worst thing that the impulse to evil can achieve? To make us forget that we are the children of royalty. We rise together for the sounding of the shofar, Tikyot Malchuyot. Let's say the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai, melech al kol haaretz, mekadesh Yisrael, v'yom hazikaron. Tekiah, Shavarim Teruah, Tekiah, Tekiah, Shavarim, Tekiah, Tekiah, Teruah, Tekiah. Once again, I invite you to take your seats to read the passages on Zichronot for yourselves. We're going to come together in the middle of page 192 just to read one together. From Bachya ibn Pakuda. Days are scrolls. Write on them what you want to be remembered. Let's rise together for the Tikiot Zichronot. Baruch atah Adonai, zocher habrit. Tekiah, Shevarim Truah. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shevarim, Tekiah, Tekiah, Teruah, Tekiah. And for a third time, we'll take some time for ourselves as we read the sayings on Shofarot on pages 196, 197, and 198. And in the words of Maurice Joseph on page 198, the shofar sounds the alarm for the wayward heart. It is the bugle call of the conscience. It warns the slumbering soul of its peril. We rise together. So we're on page 200. Please recite the blessing with us. Baruch atah Adonai, shomea kol turat amo Yisrael, barachamim. Blessed are you, God. In mercy, hear the shofar blast, the cry of your people Israel. Tekiah, Shevarim Truah. Tekiah, Tekiah, Shevarim, Tekiah, Tekiah, Teruah, Tekiah, Tekiah, Shivarim Thruah, Tekiah Gedolah, on page 202. Ratzei Adonai Eloheinu b'amcha Yisrael, v'litfilat ha'am she'eh, modim anachnu lach, al kol hatovot she'asita emanu ve'im avotenu, ve'im amanu mata raglenu, chastecha Adonai yisadenu, sim shalom tova uvracha aleinu, B'sefer Chaim bracha v'shalom, ufanasa tova, nizakeh v'nichatev lefanecha, anachnu v'chol amcha beit Yisrael, l'chaim tovim u'l'shalom. Baruch atah Adonai, hamvarech et amo Yisrael, b'shalom. And on page 206, we join together with the words of the Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. Yit gadal ve'yit kadash shemei rabbah, ba'alma divrach chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yamechon, u'v'chayei dichol beit Yisrael, b'gala v'zman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'alam almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'a v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitada v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei kudsha b'richu. Le'ela le'ela mikol bichata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Diamiran ba'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol ha'olam, v'imru amen. the little things that you don't know you're going to miss. I just made a decision based on the time that the parking runs out, which I haven't been able to do or had to do for 18 months. Those little things that kind of change the way that you think about the world. I'm incredibly grateful to this small choir of people for coming in and singing. Thank you. It has been a real privilege, and as I've said so often through this period, we are really appreciating the things that we have taken for granted. And, for 12 years of my rabbinate at Eilith, I took for granted that I would have a choir there singing with me, and to be able to have this for the first time in 18 months is a huge privilege, so thank you. Also, thank you to everyone who has joined in from home. We really appreciate people reading Torah and Haftarah and community prayers. And a special thank you to Janine, who multitasked this morning and also blew shofar for us so beautifully, so thank you. We will continue to run this strange parallel High Holy Days over the course of the next few weeks. So your information about Yom Kippur will come to you, I want to say tomorrow, it may be Friday. We just need to do a little bit of reflection on the last couple of days before we can confirm all of the details. But you can already book the in-person services for Yom Kippur, that rolling program of in-person services taking place in the marquee. You can book that from now. Of course, before we get to Yom Kippur, we also have Shabbat. It used to be the case that Shabbat Shuvah was a down day in the life of Eilith. Only one member of the clergy team would work on Shabbat Shuvah. That's not the case this week. So obviously there is our Friday night service, and there are spaces you can book to join us in our outdoor prayer space. That service starts at 6:30. And then on Saturday morning, there is a 9 o'clock bat mitzvah taking place outside that you can join online. And then at 10:30, Rabbi Elliot will be leading our dedicated online service. Elliot also is leading a shiur at 9:15 beforehand. And then at 11 o'clock, there is a kolot service in the outdoor prayer space, which you can book to join us for, and that is also online. One last announcement. It's lovely to have good news. So congratulations. I don't know if they're with us, but if not, I'm sure you'll speak with them. Some of you, congratulations to Noam and Ruth Tamir on the birth of a granddaughter over the last 24 hours, a baby girl for Eleanor and Ari. We wish them mazel tov and every joy. We are on page 208. We're going to sing together with this wonderful choir the words of Adon Olam.
Amen.
much of one for words of blessing to end services, but it feels that our world and our lives need blessings right now. So at the bottom of page 210 to conclude. Baruch Aleinu Adonai Eloheinu, et hashana hazot vet kol minei tvuata latova. Bless this year, our living God, and may all that it brings be good for us. Ten bracha al panei ha'adama, v'saba et ha'olam kulo mituvecha. Send your blessings over the face of the earth. Satisfy all the world with your goodness. Uvarech shnatenu l'shana tova, and bless our year as a good year. Shana tova. So we are going to unmute everyone at home so that you can wish one another Shana Tova if you wish, and also so you can, they can't speak to you, but if you want to speak to the choir, you can say words to them as well. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, everybody.
Shana
Tova.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Eat well.
And
Happy New Year, everybody.
Shana Tova, all.
Shana Tova, keep well.
And thank you very much to the choir. Fantastic job with the choir there.
And Paul, the Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, everybody.